Number one, just people caring
Hmm.
is enormously important. The number of texts and emails and calls that we got, are you okay? And just learning about it and having that sense of people caring is enormously important. I mean, no one can wave a magic wand and suddenly your house comes back.
How can parents talk to their children about natural disasters? Maybe they're happening more, or in general, in a way that's honest but doesn't create fear.
Yeah, so I mean, there are different layers to this. Obviously, again, it depends on the age of the child and how much they were traumatized.
Yeah.
But I guess the general rule is you will get to your agenda, which is probably, thank goodness we're all healthy, or we can buy more things. It's stuff, don't worry about it. But it takes time to get there. It also becomes an opportunity to talk about your life as a parent, to share. This happened to me when I was a kid, and it's not nearly as bad as what just happened to you. So I'm not comparing it, but it was really hard for me at the time, and this is how I got through it, et cetera, et cetera. And that becomes a moment of joining and actually of growth in the relationship. Again, not taking it away from your child. The goal isn't not to make it all rainbows and puppy dogs and, whipped cream, because these things can be really traumatic.
Hello, and welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I am Dr. Mona, a pediatrician, mom, and I always get the most amazing guests. And today is a little bit of a somber conversation, but an important one. And I hope that you leave it feeling uplifted, with a plan, with hope in this world. And I'm welcoming someone who's actually been on the podcast a couple times before, who you may know, Dr. Harvey Karp. He is a pediatrician, a child developmentalist. He is the author of one of the most popular parenting books, The Happiest Baby on the Block, and the inventor of the snooze. So I know so much of my community is aware of who he is. They may not have known his name, but now you do. And he's joining me today because he was actually impacted by the fires in LA. We are recording this in January, and if you're not familiar, obviously you should be. There was a devastating fire, multiple fires in LA, and unfortunately he lost his home as well as his community where he lived. And he's joining me to share a little bit about his story, but also being a pediatrician himself, and also myself being a pediatrician, how to parent in this time of worry, in this time of understanding that there's natural disasters, how to explain it to our children. We're talking about parenting in the time of climate change and in the time of uncertainty. So first of all, thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Karp. I know it's been a difficult time for you. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's important discussion, and I mean, it is an amazing trauma that I was actually not in Los Angeles at the time. My wife
Mhm.
was at home, spent a couple of hours watering the area around the house to try to protect it, but it was to no avail. So being away from that when it was happening was very difficult for me.
Yeah.
But when everything, we lived there for 30 years, and when everything you own, every bit of memorabilia literally is gone in a couple of hours, and your home. And it turns out that a mile away, we had just moved our daughter and son-in-law and their two kids from New York to be close to us. We rebuilt our house, and at the same time, our house was burning down. Their house was burning down, and so it's just been really a devastation. And then, as you said, the entire community. It's one thing if your house burns down; it's a terrible thing to
Yeah.
happen. If you have an electrical shortage or who knows what, but to have a devastation of an entire ecosystem environment, your neighborhood for the last 30 years. Of course, people who go through different natural disasters that unfortunately we're all becoming more familiar with, floods and things like that, that really can affect a broad swath in addition to whatever your personal loss is. So it is something that more and more we pediatricians are engaging with families about.
And I want to get into so many things. We could talk for a long time about this and just share, obviously, your experiences and what you've done as a pediatrician and being in that community. But before we get into the conversation, I always ask my guests this: what is one thing you hope our listeners take home by the end of the conversation?
Um, I guess some it's a series of practical points
Hmm.
of ways to approach these things. As parents, we don't have the guidebook. I mean, you're kind of fortunately in the age of the internet, there are guides that you can search for. But we're all flummoxed by these complex discussions. How do we help our kids process it and move forward and be strengthened by the experience, if at all possible? And so I'm hoping that I'll be able to give some very specific ideas for ways to interact with kids, and not just through these major disasters, but through the things that happen, on a week by week basis that are upsetting in your life also, because we're dealing with a big aspect of something that is a much more common phenomenon in families.
And, one of the things I wanted to ask you as a fellow pediatrician, being in this community that had so much devastation, is oftentimes, you're a pediatrician, you obviously have a parent, you're a parent, you said you just moved your child and they lost their home too. And how has it been navigating that as a pediatrician and a parent and a member of this community? Because I know you know this, that after many disasters, or for example, for me, there was a school shooting near where I practice, people turn to the pediatrician for strength at the same time that we're also struggling, right? With the same things that are happening. I mean, you lost your home. People may lean on you because you are a figure that has been supportive of your community. And so, how has that been navigating it both as a pediatrician, a parent, a member of your community?
I think it's almost a blessing as a pediatrician and a parent to be able to focus on what your children and your grandchildren need, so that
Yeah.
you don't have to focus on. I mean, we had both my wife and I had a difficult time last night as we were having visions of the things that we loved so much and imagined flames around them, and your mind can really become um, um, obsessed with some of these images, and that's it's better to get distracted, especially during this period of the immediate the grief that occurs. So I welcome that. I'm glad to be helpful. We had, my little granddaughter who cut her gums the other day and was bleeding terribly,
Oh,
so I got to go over and be a grandparent and a pediatrician, and that was kind of a nice. I mean, not nice for her, obviously, but I was happy to be able to be available.
I mean, you're a helper, right? I mean, my favorite quote is from Mr. Rogers about, whenever in times of chaos, or I'm not getting the quote right, but look for the helpers, right? I mean, going to your grandchild, I know it's your grandchild, but helping and talking to people. And,
Yes,
I really appreciate you sharing that moment of
yeah, that's a
vulnerability
great
because,
quote. Yeah.
yeah, because sometimes our listeners or sometimes people forget that we are also human, that doctors have feelings, that they have loss. And, one of the things I wanted to ask, having experienced this, is what do you think was helpful for people from the outset? Like, let's say me coming to you, you had this loss, which is a huge loss of a home and memories. What are some helpful things that people said? And what are some unhelpful things that people said after this has happened?
Well, number one, just people caring
Hmm.
is enormously important. The number of texts and emails and calls that we got, are you okay? And just learning about it and having that sense of people caring is enormously important. I mean, no one can wave a magic wand and suddenly your house comes back. People, we were at a cafe a couple of days ago, the whole family just trying to
Hmm.
figure out, what houses we're going to look at, because not only are we out of houses, but thousands and thousands of
Yes.
people are. So trying to find some place to live is extremely difficult in our community. But we started talking to the people at the table next to us, because there's that sense, breaking down the boundaries when you're involved in these things. They were very empathic. And the women ended up saying, listen, I've got grown kids, I got 2 bedrooms. You don't know me, I don't know you, but if I can be helpful and you need a place to crash, you're more than welcome. I mean, that kind of thing.
That is so
It
nice.
it really is wonderful. And things that aren't helpful, um, I don't, you know, um, why did you have more fire insurance?
Right, right. Well, I mean, that's what I was hearing here, right? Like, well, why would you build a house in that place if you know it's prone to fires? I get that from hurricanes, and so I could add to that because everyone is like, oh, there's a few things. Why wouldn't you leave? Why did you? There's so much like Monday morning quarterbacking when you haven't experienced it. And with hurricanes is much different, but I know a lot of people who hunker down and then devastation happens because they don't know how bad it's going to be, right? And then fires, it happens so fast. Obviously, you get the warnings, but then it's like, well, yeah, you have insurance. It's not so bad. You just mentioned that you lost your home. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that was 30 years and you were envisioning I mean, it's a community. I don't look at it as just a loss of a home and that you have insurance that can rebuild. I look at it as these are memories. These are
Yeah.
safety. like a sense of safety that people don't have. And you, like you said, the whole community is devastated. It's not like you have the grocery store to go to. It's like everyone's rebuilding together, and that's really hard when it's happening to everybody. It's a
Yeah,
collective
that's
trauma.
really true. Fortunately, it's very few people who have that wagging
Response.
finger
Yeah.
attitude. Yeah, so people have really been overwhelmingly very friendly and caring and responsive, empathic.
And if you don't mind me asking, how old are your grandchildren? Because I'm not sure if they're the age of like they were asking questions about what happened or anything like that, or one of them's a toddler.
Not so much yet. It's a
Okay.
3-year-old and a 1-month-old.
So
So
my next question is, from your perspective, I mean, this is the first time this has happened to you, like a natural disaster, but how can parents talk to their children about natural disasters? Maybe they're happening more, or in general, in a way that's honest but doesn't create fear for the child or anyone listening.
yeah, and I would broaden this discussion because it's people who are involved in these devastating experiences, but they're also kids who hear the news, hear their parents talking, and wonder if they have a vulnerability. Are they safe? So it actually is a pretty broad discussion for parents to be able to engage with their kids. Obviously, it depends on the age of the child,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So as you said, with my 3-year-old granddaughter, we're not talking about fires. She did. Fortunately, she didn't see it. She wasn't in immediate danger. They evacuated and got out of there before there was any exposure to more than just a little bit of smoke. So that's not an issue. There are other issues which we can talk about in terms of stability and normalcy and relationships. Excuse me. But once kids are, I kind of think of there's a wonderful series of books by authors Ilg, ILG, and Ames. These are older books. They're from the 1970s, even. It's called Your 1 Year Old. It's a series. Your 1 year old, your 2 year old, your 3 year old, your 4 year old. So they're little bite sized books. And the 4 year old one talks about how they are sunny and happy and funny. The 5 year old talks about how they are more. Um, open to what's going on in the world. I think about it like a 4 year old knows their backyard, every square inch of it. They run around. A 5 year old puts a chair up to the back fence and climbs on the chair and looks over the fence and suddenly sees there's a huge world out there, and they recognize that there are risks and dangers, and they hear about 4 year olds maybe worry about monsters, but strangers and thieves and can I be kidnapped and all sorts of things
Yeah, yeah.
come into your mind. A 3 year old would never in the world think of those things. A 5 year old can perseverate on those. They hear about a relative dying and can this happen to mommy and daddy. They really start going over things in their mind. So this is the age, number one, where you want to be open to hearing what your child is thinking about. And that's a bit tricky in and of itself because you can't just say, well, what are you thinking? Some kids will express that. Other kids are more hesitant. They aren't sure what they're feeling other than some general experience of anxiety. Others feel like someone may make fun of them for their fear or their concern. And so, in, excuse me, I apologize. I wrote a book called The Happiest Toddler on the Block, and that talks about a technique called toddlerese. How do you translate anything you want into a young child's language? And it's really what we do with adults as well, which means that when a person is upset, you narrate back what you're hearing them saying. But the key points are not the words you say. It's your tone of voice and your gestures. So it's short phrases, repetition, and mirroring a third of the tone of voice and gestures that the person has. So if someone is very, very upset, rather than saying, you seem very upset. Oh my gosh, that must be so difficult. And actually, those words are fine, but the way I delivered it feels terrible.
Yeah.
If you use short phrase repetition and a third of their nonverbal content, so it's like, what you holy everything, and it happened in an hour. I don't. I'm so so sorry. I am so very sorry. If you read that in a book, it would seem a little bit odd. But when someone says it in that
Yeah.
way, it's so much more human than just saying the words. And so with our toddlers, we use that all the time. When your child is upset, rather than saying, honey, well, you should need to be more careful, which maybe you will get to later as a message, because we do have to teach them to be more careful. But in the moment, it's short phrases, repetition, a third of their feelings. Oh no, no, you were trying and you tried to pick that up, but it was so heavy and it fell. It fell on your foot. It fell on your foot. And then I saw your face get sad and you said, ow, ow. Again, someone might say, well, that's baby talk. But the truth of the matter is that when someone is upset, so you have two halves of the brain, the left half, which is the logical adult half of the brain, and the right half, which is the emotionality,
Mhm.
more kind of reactive part of the brain. The more upset we get, the more we turn off our adult brain and we become more reactive and our language becomes more basic or primitive. In fact, we call that going ape, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's important to be able to, when a person, a child or adult is very upset, to simplify your language, use a little more repetition. As they calm down, then you can explain things or express things and get into more normal language. So it's a bit of a dance that we do with children who are upset.
Very important. I love that, and I love that you talked about the 2 parts of the brain. I think that's actually a very common thing that we know, but a lot of parents are, like, trying to explain or trying to explain logic when they're not when their child's emotional, and even when something like this, but just general tantrums, and you give some great examples of how that would work, so thank you, and I agree, that's why I love the podcast because the tone of voice versus the book,
Yes.
being able to give that example of, like, I agree. When you said, "Oh, so sad," I was like, "Okay, I don't feel anything from you." But the moment you gave me that, "Oh my god," I was like, "I do feel sad, Harvey, I do." It was definitely different, and I hope people understood that difference because it is obvious, and I love the tone and gesture because people, a lot of what's happening right now is like people want quote like scripts. Like, what should I say to my kid? And I'm like, yes, it's great that I can give you a script, like you said, but how are you delivering it? Do you mean it? Like, do you actually feel it? Or are you just saying it because you think someone's telling you to say it? Because then it's not going to go off well. And I really appreciate that.
And
It,
that relieves parents also, because when you help them
yes.
understand, it's much simpler than you think. Just describe what you're seeing from your heart. Don't worry about being eloquent at that moment. Be engaged and use repetition. I mean, say it over. Honey, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it, honey.
Yeah.
What you just went through, what you just did, et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds kind of actory or something, maybe a little bit, too dramatic, but and you have to be, what I said was a third of their emotion. When they're screaming, you don't want to be screaming, oh, you're so sad. That's the worst thing ever. You don't want to be at their level of emotion and you don't want to be too far down here. It's about a third of their emotion.
I love that. I think this might actually segue to the next question I have, but I don't know if this came in your experience in the last few weeks, but your grandchildren are a little young, but in your community, if there's an older child, and we can use a hypothetical who came home back, they evacuated, came back, and now everything's gone. Right, that's obviously a very traumatic experience for a child. Their bedroom, the stability that we talked about. How can a parent approach the aftermath of a natural disaster? Let's say it's a fire, let's say it's a hurricane where there's damage, where there's loss, whether it's property, whether it's a person, what would be kind of some steps there? And I know what you just mentioned is part of that, but if there's anything else to add beyond that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are different layers to this. Obviously, again, it depends on the age of the child and how much they were traumatized.
Yeah.
But I guess the general rule is you will get to your agenda, which is probably, thank goodness we're all healthy, or we can buy more things. It's stuff, don't worry about it. But it takes time to get there.
Yeah.
In medicine, we learn about the stages of grief, the denial and anger and bargaining and then acceptance. And the same thing happens when you're grieving about anything. So what's important for parents to understand is, of course, we want to get our kids to the other side of that, but be in the moment. And maybe it's going to be in the days of these moments, because very much you can think of grief also like an onion. You peel a layer, there's another layer. You peel a layer, there's another layer. Um, I lost my things. I can't trust you anymore to protect me.
Mhm.
I don't have safety. I don't. Um, um, I don't um, uh, feel like it's worth working hard at school, because if everything can be burned up in a second, why shouldn't I just play video games? There may
Yeah.
be many different layers of this with your child, and your first thing is just to be open to hearing it. You don't have to agree. Just because you listen doesn't mean you agree with what they're saying. Oh wow, I can see it from your point of view. Yeah, why even bother going to school if everything can just go? I can totally see what you're saying. And then you'll get to the but, it may seem crummy now, but people, there are silver linings to these experiences too. One
Yeah.
of the things I like parents to do, not in the exact acute moment, but after a few days, to help talk about other people in other disastrous situations. We tend to think it's just us,
Mhm.
but most of us know people who are dealing with cancer and dealing with other types of things that have totally upended their lives. We read about floods and hurricanes and earthquakes and other disasters. And you start thinking about, I wonder what the kids are like in that situation. And then you start to realize that it is a universal experience to go through challenges. Um, it also becomes an opportunity to talk about your life as a parent, to share. This happened to me when I was a kid, and it's not nearly as bad as what just happened to you. So I'm not comparing it, but it was really hard for me at the time. And this is how I got through it, et cetera, et cetera. And that becomes a moment of joining and actually of growth in the relationship. Again, not taking it away from your child. The goal isn't not to
Yeah.
make it all rainbows and puppy dogs and whipped cream, because these things can be really traumatic. When you can allow them to speak, something very strange happens, almost magical, which is the more they feel safe in recounting their sadness of what they lost and every single thing that they lost and this and that and that, things in the lower levels come out.
Yeah.
Most of the time anger is a superficial feeling, but down below, where you have grief and you also have fear. And for a lot of the kids in the fires and in these other natural disasters, it's like, now I'm vulnerable
Yeah.
because I saw your face, mommy and daddy. I saw the fear on your face. And if you're afraid, how do you think that makes me feel? And again, it's not that parents are going to be perfect. You are allowed to have your feelings. You try not to act out too much in front of your kids, right? You do want to keep it together if you can, but you can also turn lemons into lemonade. And when it does happen, you could say, "Whoa, you were watching mommy, and that looked scary to you. I saw your face got sad, and my face was really scared." And you can turn it into something, because if you talk about it, you can gain mastery over it, and you can make a plan to together. Next time that happens, here's what we're going to do, and mommy is going to protect you, and here that I'm doing so many different. You're going to be amazed at how many things I'm doing to protect us, and I did a lot of things to protect us, but it didn't all work out. But this is that can encourage a child to have especially for kids before they get to 8 or 9 years of age. They're very concrete. They need to know the exact things that are going to help them and protect them.
One thing I love that you talked about was the relatability, right? You talked about, hey, when I was your age, or I've been through that too. And I think I love that. I think parents often think that saying that is taking it away from the child, but you're not, right? I mean, that's how we build connection. And children love hearing that we also feel the same things we do, because they look at us as someone they look up to. And so when they feel like I'm seen, that, oh, my mommy or daddy or caregiver understands because they went through it, or they can tell me, it is such a valuable thing. And I knew that when you were coming on, although we're talking about natural disasters, that these pearls are going to apply to so many
Yeah,
parenting situations. And so I'm so grateful for that. But it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I hope
thank you.
people really take home that message of connection and relatability, and just say how you're feeling. You don't have to sob in front of them, but if you are sobbing, I'm really sad right now. And I know you were really sad too. But here's what I'm going to do to make myself feel better. And we're together and using that as a positive. And I love that you're
Yeah,
looking
you
for
hug
those.
me. That makes me feel so good
Yes, I
because
love that.
what you said about Mr. Rogers, where look for the helpers, kids can be helpers too.
Yeah.
And that empowers them and it makes them feel valuable and useful. Not forcing them to be helpers, but helping you, helping the family, helping others. Like we do, a lot of people do Christmas time or Thanksgiving, to go to a shelter and try to help the people who have less than you do. So there are lots of different ways kids can write cards. They can draw drawings that can be mailed to, hospitals and whatnot. There are a lot of ways and when you do those things, you have some sense of mastery and control. And that's a big
Yeah.
part of dealing with all of this.
Yeah, my little boy, I mean, we live in hurricane zone. We have seen this happen, right? But we were watching the fire stuff because obviously it was everywhere, and we have friends who have been impacted as well. And he's 5, and I turned to him and I was like, "Sweetie, it's really sad. It's a hard thing. People lost their homes." He's like, "So they lost their toys?" And I'm like, "Yeah, honey, a lot of kids lost their toys." And he was like, and I was like, "What do you think we should do? What do you think we should? How can we help?" And he's like, "Oh, maybe they can move with us." Like he's 5, right? He was like, "Maybe they can move here." And I was like, that's such a sweet gesture, but maybe do we have enough space for everybody? And I'm like, do you think you want to send some of the toys that you haven't used yet? And maybe we can donate it to them. And so we shipped him off. Like there was some toys he got for his birthday. And he was like, and I know there's a lot of materials that people have there, but I was like, let me teach him about this sort of
That's
stewardship
beautiful.
and how we can help. And I think, like you said, it can start so early. There's so many different ways, depending on the age, whether you are directly impacted or whether you see it happening like we did, to create that sort of thing. Because someday, sometime, we may be in that situation, and we
Exactly.
need to create that sort of compassion for each other. And I think
Right.
that's so
And that
important.
sense of community that we all help each other
Yeah.
because nobody, and this is a teaching opportunity about that. We all are dependent on each other. We're dependent on the firemen and the policemen and the teachers and the nurses and the doctors and the people who pick up the garbage and clean the streets. And our neighbors are dependent on us. When they need something, they can knock on our door. And this becomes a teaching moment about the interconnectedness that we all have. I do want to just, if I could just say a kind of little nuances to the things we were talking about before. One thing is when you want to relate about your experiences as a child, which is a beautiful thing to do, it's not meant to say, well, suck it up and deal with it
Right.
because I had to do this. It isn't, I mean, ultimately you may say suck it up and deal with it. That's a reasonable place to end up, but you're not going to start there. You have to allow a person to express their feelings because when you can express your feelings and your emotions in a safe environment, then there's the healing process. And then you get strong and then you can get on to the next day. If you're never allowed to express your anger and your fear and your sorrow, it never goes away. And many
Yeah.
of us still hold on to this sorrow or anger or frustration that we felt as little kids that we
Hmm.
were never allowed to express. When you can express it in a loving environment, actually it kind of evaporates and you can get on with your life. So that's one thing. Second thing is you allow them the expression to say it for, 2, 3 minutes. Don't be in a hurry to say, well, you know what happened to me when I was little?
Hmm.
You'll get there, but don't be in a rush to get there. And then in your situation where you're saying, what could we possibly do? Which is such a wonderful mastery opportunity, because let's use our brains to figure out how we can be helpers. It's good to make a list and write things down
Hmm.
because when you write something down, it means you're taking your child very seriously
Hmm.
and valuing their ideas. And it gives you a chance to say, okay, that's one. What I'm wondering, are there, like, maybe are there other ways? Let's try and think. Let's use our noodles and think of how else we could help them with our toys, maybe, and you
Yeah.
just try to help them brainstorm, which is a learning opportunity of this as well, where they feel smart, engaged, and encouraged to use the adult part of the brain, which allows them to feel a mastery. One thing is, as an adult, be aware of what you're talking about and what you have on the radio or television in front of little kids, because when they're 4 and 5 and 6 years of age, they may get more upset
Yeah.
by things that are scary on television and whatnot. So part of our job as parents is to protect our kids from exposure to that. I mean, if it happens, it happens. It's not the worst thing in the world. But to the degree you can protect kids from, watching the riots for 3 hours on television
Yes.
or that kind of thing, because you never know how their little brains are going to process these things. The last thing is a technique. It's also in the Happiest Toddler on the Block. That's very, very helpful for parents on a day-to-day basis, but in addition, when these traumatic things happen, which is called gossiping.
Hmm.
What I mean by gossiping is saying something to someone else that you allow your child to overhear. And it's a weird thing. We all believe more that we overhear than what's told directly to us. If I say, "Hey, Mona, you look great today," you're going, "Oh, thanks very much." But if I'm whispering to somebody over here, "Hey, Mona looks great today," "Oh, yeah, I do. Is it my hair?"
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, exactly. I love it. It's true.
And so you can reinforce the positive or the negative things that you want your kid to learn by whispering it to the bird outside or pretending to talk to grandma or talking. These little kids, they all have big ears. You're driving in the car talking and your kid in the back seat goes, "I heard what you said," and they want to participate. So use that never for evil, only for good, but to reinforce these messages like, "You know what? Mommy and daddy are so strong. We did everything to make everything safe in our house. So we're taking care and everything is super duper safe." And your little kid is listening to that. Or, "Bobby ate all of his peas." I said, "Good job, Bobby," which you had said directly to him before, but overhearing it reinforces the value of the message.
Oh, I love those tips. Again, transition like the transcending not just obviously talking about all this stuff, but parenting. And so I'm so grateful for that. And I guess my final question is about natural disasters in general. I don't think me and anyone can deny. I mean, some people do deny, but that's another conversation that they're becoming more frequent and the severity of them are becoming more frequent with, temperature and water, the water warmth changing for us in hurricanes. We're seeing a lot more intense hurricanes on the Gulf because of the water getting hotter. I mean, it's a real reality. So, how can families, especially anxious parents, because one of the things I hear is, how do I raise this kid in the future looks bleak? How can we, educate, raise these children with emotional resilience and sort of optimism for the future, knowing what we know right now, and that's kind of it's a hard thing, but what can we do to like bring some positivity back into where we're at and raise the next generation of thinkers and helpers and optimists and realists even too, but more so hope for the future.
Well, and fortunately, there are lots of things that we can do. So there
Hmm.
are all sorts of books and products. There's a book called Imagine This. I think it's called Imagine This. Laurie David is one of the authors of that, where it has all sorts of things to do with your kids to kind of help in the house and raise consciousness about the importance of being aware of your environment. Because listen, we are the stewards of our environment. Whether
Hmm.
you're a Bible follower or you're agnostic, it doesn't really matter. We have a responsibility not just for our family, but for our country, and our and to maintain the environment so that we're leaving something, a legacy for our children. Like we like to say, we weren't given America uh, by our grandparents.
Right.
We're borrowed it from our grandchildren. And when you understand that we've borrowed it, then we have to return it, in better shape than we borrowed it. I think that the whole idea about climate change, I mean, the science is very clear. The world is heating up. 10 of the hottest years in recorded history were the last 10 or 11 years. Whether you believe it's human caused or not doesn't really matter. We do know that carbon dioxide makes it worse. And so let's do things to reduce carbon dioxide, whether even if there are other natural things going on to make the climate worse, let's do the things we do have control over rather than just saying, "Well, I can't do anything." We can do a lot. And we need to do that for the benefit of our children and to try to make our environments safer. So I, encourage people to recognize the fact that we are a part of everything around us. And when kids recognize that, the flowers and the trees have been there for a long time and they have babies as well.
Hmm.
And you help them have a sense of how people used to live in the woods, and the woods would give them sustenance and protection and safety and a place to live, as it does for the animals. It allows us to recognize that we have responsibilities and a stewardship. So that's the way I kind of look at it and talk to my kids and grandkids about it.
I love this. This was such a great conversation. I, again, appreciate you talking to me from a friend's house, by the way, because obviously you are displaced with the fires. And
I
thank
apologize
you.
for this background
No, that's
here.
okay. I mean, the fact that, when your team reached out and they were like, "Hey, do you want to talk to him?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, does he want to talk to me? Like, is he okay?" Like, I really appreciate it because, using your time and your community's time of pain and, grief and really helping others. I mean, that's kind of what we do as pediatricians also. And, it's just a testament to you. And thank you. What would be a final message for everyone tuning in to take home after listening to this amazing conversation?
Well, just to say this is an introduction. I mean, there's
Yeah.
much, much more to learn. There's a bunch of stuff in The Happiest Toddler on the block, but there are many other resources that are available on the internet. There are many other things parents can do. Artwork makes a difference. Prayer makes a difference. Rituals, you can have a ceremony to say thank you to your house if you lost your
Mhm.
house, and put a little box together with memorabilia or drawings that you make so that you have a closing experience. So there are many, many, many different things that can be helpful on a very practical level. I think what we really covered today were some of the big strokes and
Yeah.
the kind of the general communication approaches.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. Where can people go to stay connected, whether it's with Happy's Baby or you yourself, so that they can stay up to date?
Yeah, we have tons and tons of information for free for people at our website, which is happiestbaby.com. We're trying to make SNU available to everybody. Thousands of people get it for free from their employers.
Mhm.
And now we're starting with Medicaid programs so that all at-risk families can have access to this. And our goal is really that it'll be covered by insurance and whatnot. So that's what we're working really, really hard to accomplish.
I love, and you were actually on my show. We talked about the 5 S's and newborn sleep, and also we did another episode about sleep and mental health. So we've talked about that, and you guys can listen to those episodes as well. Just search my website. Harvey, thank you so much. I'm wishing you healing. I'm wishing you love. I'm wishing your community healing. I've been thinking of you. I'm an LA girl. Even if I wasn't an LA girl, this is something that impacts us all, and I feel for your community, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Mona. I really appreciate the opportunity.